Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Nathan Hull. I'm Norwegian, apparently. That's an in-joke. I'm one of the guys from ThinkPub. So I represent with a Norwegian hat. So it's been a fantastic introduction, hopefully, to a few of you around the ThinkPub concept, and a little bit of the dialogue from my peers here this morning, giving an insight into what we're trying to achieve. So as you learned at the start, so ThinkPub across the EU will be building a curriculum and training programs across 5 key topics: emerging technologies, managerial innovation, marketing innovation, reading and translation. And this is just a taste of some of the things we'll bring in to small and medium publishers across approximately 20 countries, we think. And my background, to try and join the conversation together today, I think probably there's a perspective that I've both worked in a publishing house, so I was digital director at Penguin in the UK, and since then I've worked outside in tech, mostly in startups. So I've got the perspective of being a publisher and embracing all things new and working out how to translate that and bring it into a largely traditional business. And I've also got the perspective of being the new guy with something innovative and trying to feed it in to a traditional publishing house. And I'm going to try, we're going to have a conversation live rather than me interview my 4 friends. Because there's some interconnected topics this morning, but we also you covered quite a lot of ground. So we're going to try and join it all together. And please do think of some questions yourselves. We will be around, or my colleagues will be around, but anything more interactive is always more fun. So let's start with I wanted to come to you. I'll start with you, Michalis. There were 2 from the angle of a publisher in the first place. The Greek market you spoke about, from your perspective, and Raúl, you spoke about Spain and the Spanish language markets. Michalis, is there anything else you can add around the differences between the 2 markets? So yours is, I would say, is a less mature digital market. Spanish language isn't at the level of English yet, but it's way more mature than Greek. And obviously, it's a way bigger language. So kind of wanted a little bit of conversation maybe around the differences between those 2 markets to start with.
And also I would say that, Planeta's example represents a very large group. Like the Greek publishers, even what we call large publishers in Greece are actually medium-sized by European standards, by titles output or by, income and so on. So one thing, first of all, which is important is most of the publishers cannot really experiment that much. You can have all this array of products, but of course it is an inspiration. The second thing is that, because yes, you very politely mentioned that we are a less mature market, the thing is that there is a kind of, let's say, benefit, not a necessary benefit, that you can see how things have evolved and learn from it. For example, the audiobook market, we have it like for 4 years now. It is important to learn from, let's say, the Spanish side, that it may take some time to catch up this idea. So, when you do something new, it is very easy to get disappointed very quickly, and I think that's wrong.
But learning quickly is important, right?
Yes.
Learning quickly, the old adage of failing fast, that still counts. Yeah. But then the challenges between the 2 markets are identical though, right? So if you're a smaller emerging market or a large language market, as a publisher, you're still facing the same things, right? You've still got new skill sets to employ, new things to learn about, new communications internally about top-down dialogue and support from above. All of these things remain the same, regardless of market, do they not?
I would say there's a big difference, though. The Spanish language market has a big potential, provided by the US and South American market, that's for sure. and it's a bigger country in terms of population than Greece, of course, so that provides more potential customers. But I would say as well that the challenge is bigger because of this opportunity. American-based publishers and big platforms might be looking for the content and to take positions. So there is an urgency. I mean, as big publishers, we may have the resources to adapt ourselves to this new environment, but small publishers needing to, with all these resources in terms of time, employee time, knowledge, money to invest in audiobook production, they might not have so much time left. So we have a bigger potential, but we are under the spotlight. We are in the open field. So I would say that's a different challenge.
Okay. Very good point, actually, because one of the things I stress is that it's not just Greece, it is also Slovenia or Latvia or even many other much larger countries. The large platforms most of the time don't really care, or it's not the priority. So, I mean, from Spotify, for example, entering the US market, expanding to other major languages, this may not happen ever in Greece, or may take, for example, many years to happen. So you have some time, but also there is some complacency in this. So they say, okay, we are alone. I mean, I'm talking about Greek publishers, so we don't need to do much because it doesn't affect us. But the waves and the topics, and it is, I believe, all around, at least the developed world, very much the same.
And Aurora, from a very different company setup. So I imagine, I've worked in both, companies that are 5 or 6 people big and ones that are thousands big. And then the description of how Tandem is set up is really, really different. And I think one thing that everybody in publishing faces, big or small, regardless of market, because our industry is changing so much all the time, is about this gaining new knowledge all the time, which is fundamentally what ThinkPub is trying to cater to, is the new skill gaps. There's new skills needed to fill these gaps in knowledge, which fundamentally means they're employing different, publishers need to think about employing different types of people all the time. Within Tandem Collective, whenever you go in to work with a publisher on a new type of campaign and they learn a little bit about how you work, I'm interested to just anecdotally to see what kind of surprise or anything you feel back from people there. Because when you had the line said no hierarchy,
yep.
Like even in startups, there's a hierarchy, and there's certain responsibilities and stuff. So do you find yourself talking about that much to them, and do you get a pushback, well, not a pushback, but some kind of surprise? And
yeah, now they know us, they know what we do and how we work, but at the beginning it was a hard job to, convince them to work with us. It has proved, we are where we are because we have proven ourselves time and time again, but at the beginning, obviously, there is a little bit of surprise. Luckily, Naomi was in the industry before she created Tandem, so she knew people, and people knew her, and she had an idea of how things worked, and that was key for us to develop Tandem. But yeah, there is that surprise factor, because it's a very unusual company, of course.
And I know I made lots of notes in your presentation as well. One thing I wanted to talk about was how people can be really keen to enter our wonderful publishing industry. And they, whether it be they want to work in the digital side or they want to be a publisher. I wanted to have a chat around this concept of people coming in for any role in publishing as a stepping stone, just so they're in. Or maybe they work at a smaller publisher with an aspiration to be a bigger publisher. And some thoughts around how, within everything that you presented and you think about, how publishers can manage that as well. About employee turnover and moving around within the company is one thing, but then retaining employees. Is it just about the satisfaction of the workplace? But how do you manage that in terms of satisfaction of your role versus your aspirations?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that, again, if you're trying to attract the talent, you need to attract the right talent, which is what we were talking about when we mentioned that job descriptions need to be clear, right? So Otherwise, the people that you're hiring are definitely going to have certain expectations that are not going to be met. On top of that, you need to balance your EVP, your employee value proposition. So it's a combination of, I am going to be clear about what I am offering from the get-go, and then I need to really offer it. And don't overpromise, right? Because people don't go on startups because of the money most of the time. They go into the kind of jobs, for example, because they match with their values, they match with the kind of work that they're doing, the projects, right? So there's no need to overpromise in terms of like, I'm going to give you private insurance, I'm going to give you like, you know, gym at work. No, just provide them with the flexibility, listen to them. The EVP doesn't have to be over the top. The most important thing is that you're clear about what you need and what you're going to provide your employees with, and to be coherent about that.
And then to create the environment to retain them.
Absolutely,
somewhat.
100%, yeah.
And Raúl, representing a very large publishing house where you arguably will have more resources than most, and you know, you're able to look at a much broader picture than most. What do you do or you and your colleagues do day to day in terms of attracting that new skill set? So how can publishers, big and small, be attractive to a more diverse set of incoming talent? So I think you touched on the fact that in audiobooks now we need casting directors, we need audio producers and a few things like this, but you know, the list could be 20 or 30 job titles long in all things digital and transformative. How do we make publishing attractive to those individuals, not least other creative types? Because as we've walked around the Matadero and you've seen the gaming communities, the illustration communities, etc., how do we make it more appealing?
That's a tricky question, and I don't have the answer. Of course, there is this shared love about books that drives a lot of excitement for people when joining a publishing house. But I wouldn't say there is an easy question, an easy answer to your question.
Thanks.
That's a challenge.
Yeah,
I mean.
no, but that's why I want to talk about it. Anyone else got a thought on it?
May I say something? I think, judging from the people I know, colleagues and so on, almost everybody has a very different background. So, it's not about the profession you do, but many different backgrounds. Of course, generally speaking, from the humanities and social sciences, but this is very broad. My only contribution to that, of course, I don't really have an answer, but is that already publishing houses are so versatile inside in terms of their background. So probably, because also, in a way, publishing is something very interdisciplinary. So we're attaching to a lot of things. So that's maybe, a precedent, good precedent. It's not an answer probably, but...
Yeah. I know from my background, I joined publishing as one of maybe 4 or 5 music executives all at the same time. I don't know whether everyone was bored with music or something was going wrong with it, that we all just tried to jump, or that publishers all looked at that skill set at the same time to bring us in to be like, new business models, how do we tackle piracy, all these kind of other things, maybe all at the same time. But what about, we talked a lot about AI in all its guises today, coming into all industries, including our own. But isn't there something about when you're engaging, you had, like one of you said about having to learn these topics yourself. Otherwise, you can't challenge it, you can't interrogate it well enough. But in doing that, I'm working with new companies. Raúl, you had a slide we had a lot of companies, but 11 Labs were on there. When you're engaging with a company like 11 Labs and learning from them as they're trying to learn from you, I always find there's a little bit of pull from those communities as well to come in, because then suddenly they can get quite excited about what we do within publishing too. Do you not find that?
I'm not sure. I think everything is changing so fast. And beyond the fact that editors, they love what they do, and usually they love a certain idea of the output they want to get from their task, then the way people engage in publishing houses, depending whether they are big or small, and how they engage with these platforms and technologies around, it's changing. I mean, I knew I wanted to work in a publishing house, and I did my best until I succeed. But then I cannot provide an answer for you, because I see every day. I mean, people, they do masters I mean, they train themselves, they learn how to work in publishing houses, and they change their minds and they go to something else, and which is good, actually, I mean, of course. Endogamy is not good. And then they come back. But I think the underlying factors have changed so much. So we need to stay humble, open-minded, take everything we can from every interaction we have with our environment, suppliers, audiences, platforms, and then just try to stay young, let's say.
And we're an ultra-curious industry anyway, right? It's our job to research and find things and learn by default, it seems. So just applying that in that arena seems like a sensible thing to do. I know you spoke about it, and we chatted a little bit as well about the importance of leadership.
Yeah.
And having initiatives, led from the top and bleeding down through a company, big and small. Should we talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Anything specific?
No, just let's start with reinforce what you've already said, maybe a little bit around the importance of it. I don't know if you've got other practical examples. And then kind of maybe then from other people who work in different types of companies, we can discuss kind of what that feels like practically.
Yeah. I can give you actually an example that it's not a positive one, but that we can learn from that. And it's around something that Michalis was talking about earlier, which it comes around adopting technology, right? And sometimes there seems to be this sort of like rat race around, we need to get the latest tech in town. And sometimes leaders look at other leaders implementing tech in other companies and they go like, oh, we need to be like that, we need to do this, And they do not question if there's real need for it, and where the need is. If it comes from the customer, if it comes from internal processes, right? And one of the things that happens is that they get into the rat race and then they implement the tech. Happens a lot with artificial intelligence and chatbots, for example, right? And it makes not only your customers kind of miserable, but your employees absolutely miserable, because you haven't spoken with them, you have implemented a decision without really actually taking into consideration the rest of the team and the rest of the company. So great, because it went from top to down, right? But not the right way. If you want to make that kind of decision, actually do your research first. And by doing your research means, where's the need? First of all, is there a real need for it? Second of all, talk to your employees, particularly the ones that are in the front line, talking on a daily basis with the clients, and see how it's going to impact the employees and what the kind of impact is going to be for the clients as well. And then take it from there.
Yeah.
And start slow. Just because something is new and fancy doesn't mean that it's going to work for you, because each company and each industry is different. So that kind of mindset, instead of going all the way and just because I'm the leader, we're going to apply this. No, because I'm the leader, I'm interested in what you have to say. Tell me about it. Let's understand the situation together.
Yeah. I think when we talked about that a little bit, my personal anecdote was, I remember when I joined Penguin from the music industry, the CEO of now Penguin Random House, Tom Weldon, was incredible in the leadership downwards, and knowing all his own skill gaps. He employed other smart people to do these things, but he wanted to at least have the basic level of knowledge of everything. So one of the first things I was tasked with was building like a 3-month-long training session that were just workshops at lunchtimes. And at that time, it was things like the basics of how to use Twitter, or the basics of HTML, or just all sorts of things. Branded virtual goods, things that don't even exist anymore. But by example, before he even announced this curriculum to the company, we just set up a ticketing system using Eventbrite or something off the shelf. Tom signed up to every single one of them, then announced at a company-wide meeting that we were going to do this, this, and this. Of course, there's a bunch of the company who were like, wow, amazing, what a great opportunity. There were the real traditionalists who just had a very specific job, that would bury their head in their thing and do it very well, but didn't want to learn everything else. And then were being told from on high, you have to do this. It's half an hour of your time. There'll be free coffee. And they couldn't say no because the CEO himself was taking these same courses. And I thought that was a great example of, not everyone can do that,
Yeah.
but it worked
No,
out.
but that's exactly what I meant earlier as well when I said that your leaders are the values of the company. They represent the company. If they do something, everyone else is likely to follow. But when they don't lead by example, that's when everything just falls apart in a way. Yeah.
Aurora.
Yeah, I wanted to say that Naomi leads by the example. If she's struggling is with work, with the workload, if she doesn't have capacity, if something is going on, if she has made a mistake, she shares everything with everyone in the process meetings. She comes to every single meeting, she's one of us, and she has created a very safe place for us to work in. If we make mistakes, it's okay. Like we work in, she says, we work in an agency, no in ER. Like, it's okay, we can learn from it, we can apologize to the customer or to the client, and we can grow from that. So we feel very comfortable and confident with her. When she has had problems, we have seen her, and so when it's us in that position, we feel totally okay with it. So
I was going to ask as well a little bit about how the non-hierarchical thing works practically, and you're all working remotely. You know, you're in different cities, different countries. I like the idea of the was it pods
Yeah.
that you described? But I'm interested in what the decision-making process is in some of those things. So, for example, I think you said you're responsible for something like newsletters. In Spanish, you have a colleague that does them in Italian.
Exactly.
And there'll be, presumably, some Tandem Collective branding around that.
Yeah.
But is there a company voice that's unified? Does someone look across both? Can you talk about decision-making processes and what is quite an abstract team structure to most?
That's okay. So we've got a pod lead that is selected, and so I will check with her if the content that I have written is okay. Obviously, the content is different in every country because the things that are going on, like the new publishing, the new books and the events are different as well. So I will double check with her, but she gives me total freedom to do what I want to do, and then she'll check the minimum details. And then the pod leads, that changes over every single year, unless you don't want to become a lead, like me, for example. You double check things with her. And if she is struggling with anything and she doesn't know the answer, she doesn't know how to help, we'll go to Naomi. But that's the last...
last port of call.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. She gives us the opportunity to fix things ourselves, because she knows we are capable of doing that.
And then the decision-making within Tandem Collective around which projects you want to take on as a company or which companies you want to work with, could you bring something in, for example, and it gets signed off by someone, or does it come from the top down where they might approach Laura or Naomi and then they tell the team what to do? How does that work?
So because we've got
process.
relations managers, we have 2 people designated in the team that are in touch with the customers. So not every single customer is in touch with every one of us. And then we are asked what kind of books we want to work with, and then, for example, I love thriller. So if a thriller campaign comes in, they'll ask me how is my capacity at that moment, if I can take it, and then I'll take it. But then we've got 2 people in charge of dealing with clients and with campaigns, and then they share the campaigns with the rest.
Okay. And Raúl, within Grupo Planeta, I mean, there was so much you disclosed to us that we could talk about, but I'm really, like, in a company your size, how do you choose, right before I got mic'd up, you were talking about being format agnostic, right? So there's the things we know, there's things that have come and gone that you would have supported to some degree, things you chose not to support that never quite happened anyway, and then there's everything to come. How as a company do you decide, and who decides what to support? So if we were music, would you have supported the mini disc, for example? You know, those kind of things that have come and gone, but a company would have spent a lot of time and energy and resource on something. What's your process?
I think we can afford to say that we are a format agnostic company because we are a very pragmatic company. And so many decisions are made bottom up. For many matters, of course, strategic decisions will emanate from the top management. But essentially, and I think that's valid for most medium, big publishing houses, we have a quite flat organization, not very hierarchical. And what we understand in Planeta, and again, I do insist, I think this is true for every publishing house, is that colleagues are smart guys. They understand what the public demands, usually. So that's what you need, in fact, I mean, to spot trends and to anticipate so you can have the proper books. And when it comes to decisions like how to compete in the market in terms of formats, again, the knowledge is probably in the organization. So what our publishing division provides in terms of managing this kind of knowledge is to be available in terms of top managers for every colleague having something to say. So you need to stay humble, you need to stay flexible, as the CEO you mentioned in Penguin in the UK, and flexible, really. So when the decision was about formats, it came from our departments, and it has to be validated, but it's very unusual that someone in Planeta will say, okay, we won't do that, because I have the sense that this is a bad decision. And so we can pivot in a very fast way as well. So that's what we do. So again, the organization provides the means and the flexibility to have people just being here and meeting colleagues from other countries and learning from them, and then going back and sharing this knowledge. So I think that's the way to behave in such a fast-moving environment. And
bearing in mind that the audience today is made from smaller publishers than yourself, I want to talk a little bit about how, and Michalis, you can jump in here as well, around some of those decision-making processes around what to do. Because not everyone can do the same thing. In terms of formats, in terms of new business modeling with the new incomers, like everybody might be aware of, we've touched on it, Spotify entering multiple markets in audiobooks. They're not yet here in Spanish language, but when they come, who jumps in first, who sits back and waits, what are their negotiation tactics going to be? That's just one example, but there's multiple things. And in a large publisher, you've got different structures and different approaches, but there is something. There will be publishing houses of 1 or 2 people or 20 people with completely different structures, but face the same decisions to make. And I want us to talk around that a little bit, around is it about experimentation? Is it about doing nothing? Is it about doing everything?
So I would start from something which is very much related to ThinkPub. And I've seen that in Greece, but in other markets too. Even when there are seminars, or in professional program, the book fairs and so on, most people from the publishing houses, I mean, it's not necessarily, we should not take it for granted that they will come. So even when there is some training available or some, information, I would say, it's not training in the book fairs or the professional program, they are not necessarily engaged. This is totally related, because if you have never really heard about, I mean, I don't know, audiobooks, the business models and so on, or you have a very vague knowledge of it, even I mean, you cannot make informed decisions even at the base level. So, for example, you are, I suppose, aware of that, when explaining subscription models to publishers, that's a headache most of the times. I mean, to the smaller ones and so on. And so that, you have to really understand how this works, for example. And I don't see any other way to have some prior knowledge. Because for me, otherwise, you are totally dependent to the guy, selling something to you.
Yeah.
If you go to a technology provider, if you go to a platform who produces and distributes audiobooks, they may say, hey, well, they can explain it to you, and they may be right, and sometimes 100% right, but of course they are selling something. So you have to have, let's say, independent knowledge to the extent that this is possible. And of course I know that in small places, in small publishing houses, this is difficult. That's what I said, like the idea of, let's say, champion. I wouldn't call it an officer or a director even. So if it's not the publisher, somebody really has to, systematically do that and also be allowed to do that. It may not be, 1 hour lunchtime seminars, but it should be part of
The freedom,
job.
right? Would I be right in thinking the freedom to do things and experiment and not be held on a tight leash is important to the EX?
It's actually a priority as well. I mean, like, the more freedom that you give your employees to actually be independent. Like, say, for instance, when I was talking about the customer support example on my icebreaker, right? I was asking the question, do you really think that this person had the freedom to actually stand out of the script and do what they wanted to do to be able to help you out? Most of the times, they don't have the freedom. They are holding a very tight leash. And that actually kills any kind of, not just only their motivation to work and do a great work for the company, but also their loyalty and their creativity. Like, if you cannot be creative and innovative, if you are not in a space where you can actually share new ideas and experiment, well then, first of all, you're literally killing your workforce in a way. And as a company, that is not a very wise decision either, because you're stunting your own growth. Because growing is all about innovation and creativity. So in order to be able to get that, you need to allow a little bit of freedom to your employees to get there.
One other note I made from when you were talking, it was near the end where you had how many points was it? Was it 5 or 7?
Oh, the 7 strategies.
The 7 strategies. Is about how much of that is outsourceable to smaller entities. I mean, maybe this might be something that people talk to you afterwards about. I don't expect you to reel off lots of things now. But when we talk about technology, ultimately everything's outsourceable if you choose not to make it, right? To Raúl's slides. But in things related to employee experience, how much of the talk, some companies won't have legal teams or HR teams or anything else. Is there a lot of resources out there for people to kind of try and build this perfect environment that you described?
So that's actually a really good question. It's not really about perfect, because let's just face it, perfection doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's about trying to be better each day. The thing about employee experience is, for instance, when I was living in Ireland, right, I worked for many different companies over there, and the smaller ones, they didn't even have HR departments. So most of the times, the EX concept would fall under operations, for example, right? And they would just try to make a better onboarding. They would just try and listen to the employees. So you don't really need someone that is, maybe I'm, shooting my own foot here, but like, the reality is that it goes from smaller to bigger. So if you are not big enough to have HR, most of the time it's going to be perhaps operations, right? Then you go into HR and they absorb EX. And then if you go bigger, you may have HR, you may have learning and development, you may have EX. So you kind of like diversify.
Yeah.
But it's not about having an EX professional inside that can help you out. Of course, if you have it, brilliant. If you don't, think about how you would like to be treated as a person, right? Then start implementing that kind of mindset. Make people-centric decisions rather than just merely practical decisions for the sake of making them revenue-wise, Yeah,
that's a really good point. Because one thing I always find with seminars and professional events is I try to not be preachy. It's like, you need to do this, because not everyone can do the same thing.
Absolutely.
But there's 2 examples I've written down here. One you've just said there, right? People don't have all these things, but we're all human.
Yeah.
So let's think how we would like to be treated and just deploy some of those things. And similarly, back to, I think it was when Michalis was talking about, you were talking about tech versus content. And even if you're in content, so in this realm we're talking about book publishers, we're all in tech. Because even the person that buys 100 books a year and has got their face buried in a printed book, they're using tech for something. It'll be in the car that they're driving or their phone that they have to use for something. So as a consumer, they're very aware of how it feels to consume things digitally. It might not be books, but it might be movies, they might play the odd game, they might buy their holiday online or their shopping online. You know, so everyone talks about AI as a new thing, but anyone who buys their shopping, their food shop online, the recommendation engine's been there forever. It's nothing new. But I like that point about we're all human anyway, so we can deploy these things. Raúl, back to deciding what to do and what not to do. You gave a great list of examples of companies off the shelf, that you didn't mention mine, we'll talk about that afterwards, but companies that can deliver things off the shelf for publishers. Give some hints of things that you think a small or medium-sized publisher should be asking. Just some basic principles that if they're going to work with a distribution company or an EPUB creation company or a sound design company, what are the key things that people should look for beyond trying to find a good, what feels like a good price? I mean, is it about like the human interaction? Is it a the publisher's gut feel on trust? Is it about doing some research?
I would say the key point is to understand what this output, let's say, okay, plays in the overall strategy. Because from that point, they'll understand if they need to pay more or less, if they can afford to wait or not, how much they need to learn from the process. So I think it's, at the end, it's understanding in a fair way, without cheating oneself, what exactly you're aiming in this process. And once you have decided, then, just like any other decision, you'll know if you have to invest yourself more or less.
Yeah. And then on the point you were making about the bigger incoming companies, so whether it be a Spotify arriving in the market for the first time, or 11 labs choosing to integrate, to talk with publishers about things. I thought it was a really key point you made about acknowledging their own roadmaps as well. Because publishers, I think, can be quite locked in on their needs, and then they think they identify a company that will deliver something for them, or a company will approach them for their books, but they don't always necessarily acknowledge the roadmap and the agenda of the other company. Would you agree? Or,
of course.
Thanks. No, I just think it's a key point. It's like everyone has their own agenda.
Yes,
but the incoming company, whether you've approached them or they've approached you, also has an agenda. And it's about finding that common ground to suit the consumer, right?
Yes, and publishers, we tend to be very self-referential at the end. No? We love so much what we do and what we get from this way of doing things that we have many times difficulties in understanding what's happening around and even embracing what this change can bring. So yes, there's this resistance to understand what other platforms or players in the environment may be chasing and how do we play in their strategy.
Yeah. And we've talked about learning a few times this morning, and that's a key point as well. The incoming companies coming to book publishers have a lot to learn around the industry as a whole, around specific lists or specific author requirements. I mean, Michalis, I was speaking to you years before my company entered Greece, and there was a lot of unique things, I would say, in terms of, apart from your alphabet, unique things about us learning about that as a completely different market and how to approach it. Because, international companies can just come in and say, we do this, X, Y, Z, and there may be big cultural differences in the way people consume. There's all sorts of things. Are there any questions from the floor before we wrap up? Oh, we have a question. Do we have a microphone, please?
Hey.
Hi. This is a specific question for Raúl because I didn't have the opportunity to ask it before. You were talking again about like very different sort of formats that you were trying to see if they were working or not, and that clearly requires like a very big budget from a publishing company. I don't think like smaller or like medium-sized publishing companies can really have this like risk at like making new content. And I wanted to know what kind of like KPIs do you keep for those? Like how do you measure ROI and what do you do after? Like, because you were talking about, for example, certain products just being marketing for marketing purposes. In that case, how would you measure if it makes sense for you to invest in that kind of format for other products?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we have to remind ourselves that the publishing industry is a prototype industry. And we tend to focus on each book as a prototype. So there is a kind of hype that drives the kind of money you'll pay up front for these rights. And that will trigger a lot of decisions after that. So with self-accomplished prophecies. So at the end, bestsellers usually start with big bets, as we say. And that means as well that there is not a lot of post-mortem. No? I mean, we in Planeta, for instance, we publish 3,000 titles every year. So that's such a big engine, no? Producing titles every year. So in that kind of ecosystem, which is completely different from the like of a technological company, from Nathan's environment, for instance, for example, it's sure that we won't track the same KPIs at the same way. And the decision at the end will be, do we have the money to run this test or not? But I'd like to underline, to insist that there is always a way to try things in a cheaper way. So you may not have the resources to produce a fancy podcast with a lot of production around. You can do it at the office, as we said. We had the ARPA Talks example, which is the editor and the author and just chatting and delivering an excellent product, which I prefer very often to listening to an audiobook. So the fundamental KPI will be, of course, how many people listen to that content, which is much more than what you get from some advertising campaigns in digital environments. We usually have load numbers that you have to trust. And understanding that as publishers, we always try to be relevant and be part of let's say, the zeitgeist in the society. And that means being where people are, so providing this kind of content. So if your content is being listened or watched or read, then it's great. I mean, you just mentioned, Nathan, how many things change, and there is this recurring topic about this huge transformation that we could be facing without being always conscious, which is, as publishers, we've been specialized in selling books for centuries. For usually people wanting to read these books, or maybe offering these books. But once we play in the subscription economy, then we are into entertaining people. And we need our content to be enjoyed. So having these new products, like you said, being listened, that's the validation of the goal we have.
Thank you, Raúl. The music tells us our time is up, but we're all hanging out for a little bit anyway in the sunshine, so you can find us all. And I would just like to wrap up. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Javier and Luis for setting up this opportunity. And maybe a little bit extra towards the question you just put there about resources and how you learn. That's one of the fundamental aims of ThinkPub. It's not just around delivering these training sessions. There's going to be a huge online resource. Was referred to as a library, and that will be materials from events like this, but the whole aim is to just share more and more knowledge. So we're an incredibly knowledgeable industry, we're an incredibly collaborative industry, And there's a lot of things that will be available on that from lots of different markets. So people at different levels of maturity can learn from other places too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.